Hello and welcome to earlymusicsources.com. My name is Elam, and today with Cappella Pratensis,
Hi!
we will share with you a beautiful motet that has never been recorded and try to see exactly how it was composed. On this channel, we often analyze a piece of music by looking at its score, marking its subjects, cadences, and other features, and try to understand how it works. In this episode, we will do something different. We will start with an empty score, build the piece note by note, and in this way try to imagine the compositional process from the composer's point of view. The piece that we will rewrite together is a very beautiful setting of the text Sicut cervus from the middle of the 16th century. At the end of the episode, the vocal ensemble Cappella Pratensis will perform it for us. Let's start. The motet we will work with is found in a Spanish collection of polyphony from the second half of the 16th century, which in modern times is referred to as Cancionero de Medinaceli. It contains Spanish songs and Latin motets. Most of the pieces are either without a composer attribution or by Spanish composers such as Cristobal de Morales and Francisco Guerrero. Some single pieces are by non-Spanish composers such as Nicolas Gombert and Orlando di Lasso, and 6 motets are by a certain Ziprianus. Some have suggested that this might be Cipriano de Rore, but considering the style of the composition, this is most likely not the case. The piece that we are interested in, a setting of the text Sicut cervus, is attributed to this Ziprianus, and since we are not sure of his identity, in this episode we will refer to him by this name. The piece starts with the famous psalm verse, Sicut cervus desiderat ad fontes aquarum, ita desiderat anima mea ad te, Deus. As the deer longs for fountains of water, so my soul longs for thee, O God. The piece ends, however, with a devotional plea for mercy and forgiveness. Miserere mei et parce peccatis meis. Have mercy on me and spare my sins. Now that we have the basic information, we can start writing out the piece together. I will try to take you step by step through the process I believe its composer, Ziprianus, may have gone through when composing it. The amount of knowledge necessary to compose such a piece is of course quite extensive, but in many past episodes we have presented bits of information that might be helpful. So feel free to re-watch some of these if you feel that you missed something. Once we have the text, the next thing we need is to choose a mode for our composition. According to some sources, the choice of mode should be dictated by the character of the text. Our text is about longing and asking for mercy, but among the many and contradictory descriptions of modes in the 16th century, none really fits this subject. Ziprianus, for reasons we cannot know for sure, chose the third mode. Choosing a mode dictates the finalis of the piece and the general ranges of each voice. Our finalis is now E. The ranges of the tenor and canto in their respective positions span an octave above it, and the ranges of the basso and alto, corresponding to the plagal variant of the mode, are a fourth lower. This simple way of determining the ranges of a mode in a polyphonic work seems more or less in agreement with the way Ziprianus understood it, as can be seen in the actual ranges of his piece. Another thing that the mode may dictate is the cadence points of the piece, but these, again, vary greatly from source to source. In this piece, Ziprianus chooses cadences on E and A, both common choices for a composition in an E mode. Now, having decided on the text and the mode, as well as the number of voices, 4, we find ourselves sitting in front of a blank page, just like Ziprianus did. If you remember, in a past episode, we presented Santa Maria's way of building a 4-part polyphonic piece based on duos. One duo, with or without imitations, is repeated by a duo in other voices. Ziprianus evidently knew this technique and decided to start his motet in this way. He wanted to begin with an imitative duo in the bass and tenor. He just needed to compose it. An important consideration when composing a melody in the 16th century was how accented and unaccented syllables were assigned to notes. We don't know exactly what guidelines Ziprianus followed, but when setting the text Sicut cervus desiderat, he came up with this melody.
Sicut cervus desiderat.
In order for this to work when imitated a fifth higher, he also took into account the melodic limitations necessary. He might have done this by following a set of rules, such as those we presented in past episodes, but most likely he didn't have to put much thought into it, as many musicians at the time had memorized the stock canonic formulas that can support such imitations. It was part of their musical vocabulary. This is how the two voices sound together. If Ziprianus had continued with the remainder of the text in this sentence, ad fontes aquarum, the duo might have been too long, or at least this is what I assume he thought. So he decides that now's the time to insert the other duo, simply copying it an octave higher in the alto and soprano. Now he just needs to fill up the blanks in the bass and tenor while their duet is repeated in the upper voices. Because he is quite brilliant, he managed to write a melody in the bass that allows the continuation of the imitation in the tenor while being consonant with the above duo that is singing the opening subject. For the text, he just repeated the word desiderat again. A pretty nice start, Ziprianus probably thought to himself. Now, how to continue? He could have copied the nice canonic desiderat of the bass and tenor in the alto and soprano, but he chose to continue differently. He chose to put the subject again in another duo, this time the tenor and alto. However, if we simply put the voices in this way, it doesn't work, as now the imitation is a fourth above and there are dissonances in the resulting intervals. Ziprianus solved this by pushing the imitation one semibreve to the right. Now it works. Then, in the same manner, but a tone lower, he decides to place the subject and imitation in the bass and tenor. Writing it a tone lower introduces a B-flat, which is surprisingly common in this mode, creating a very beautiful and sad effect. All that is left to do now is fill in the blanks. Of course, I have no idea what Ziprianus was thinking, but he might have recognized the possible hidden cadences and thought that it's time to make some. The tenor with its subject can be seen as a tenorizans, and the same is true for the transition between the last note of the tenor and the first note of the bass. Once we decide that these are cadential components, we may pair them with other cadential parts. In our soprano, Ziprianus deleted the imitation of desiderat and wrote a free melodic line with a cantizans on each of the tenorizans components. He didn't bother writing the musica ficta sharps, as he knew that any singer would know to add them. I add them here for you above the staff. For the bass line, he did a similar thing, supporting the first cadence with a bassizans, but leaving the second one without. Apart from achieving variety, in this way he also left a little pause before the next subject of the bass, which is a good way to make the next subject entrance more clear. Let's hear just that. Nice. Now we need to fill in the blanks above the bass and tenor. The soprano we can simply extend a bit with a free melisma, accompanying the bass in tenths, and we can add a similar free continuation in the alto. Around this point, Ziprianus decided that it was time to move on to the next portion of text. A common way to do this is to make a rather strong cadence and have the new subject which introduces the next portion of text overlap with it. Like this, we get a sort of musical comma without stopping the flow of the music. An easy way to do this is to lead our tenor voice into making a tenorizans. The soprano can get a free melodic line ending with a cantizans, and the bass a line ending with a bassizans. Now we have a proper cadence, and the alto can start the new subject. As we mentioned before, having a pause before a new subject makes the entrance clear, but Ziprianus wanted this cadence to be as full as possible, so he also filled in the alto part right up to its introduction of the new subject. For the new text, Ad fontes aquarum, Ziprianus uses a stock canon melody, a sequence of an ascending second and a descending third that can be fitted to the text very comfortably.
Ad fontes aquarum.
This will ensure a lot of contrapuntal possibilities. The first duo will be between the alto and the soprano. It sounds like this. Then, without worrying too much about the details, it seems like he laid out a basic plan. The alto-soprano duo will be followed by a tenor-bass duo. Then a soprano-alto duo, before the section ends with another tenor-bass duo. As you can see, it doesn't matter which voice is below or above, because the intervallic combinations in each duo are only made up of thirds and sixths. It always works. Now, this section, apart from an error that must be corrected, would probably be regarded an uninteresting student work. It's too repetitive and too simple. So Ziprianus started improving it bit by bit. First, the note values of the aquarum in the alto have to be halved in order to avoid a fourth below the tenor. Then, when the soprano enters, Ziprianus probably wanted to do the common trick of having it overlap with a cadence. In order to do this, he made the tenor stray from his subject and make a cantizans on A. And the bass a real bassizans by going all the way down to A. Now we just need a tenorizans. The alto can do it. To avoid the newly created parallels between the soprano and alto, he freely continued the line of the soprano using parallel tenths with the bass. You see how it started with a stock subject, and out of 4 entries, none ended up stating it fully. Let's listen. Ziprianus leaves the next 4 entrances more or less as they are. He only changes the ending to include a cadence, in order to prepare the next subject with the next portion of text. The next portion of text that Ziprianus sets is Ita desiderat. Again, he bases it on a stock canon melody. This time, one we dedicated a whole episode to, a sequence of a descending fourth and an ascending third. However, the way that Ziprianus set the text
Ita desiderat.
is a little weird. the unaccented last syllable is set rather unusually with 2 notes, not quite adhering to the conventions of text setting prescribed by the Italian theorists of the 16th century. It seems likely to me that in this case the melody came before the text for Ziprianus, a sin that composers were accused of sometimes at that period. Anyway, let's see how he incorporates this subject in the motet. Following the same technique he used beforehand, he overlaps the new subject over a cadence. He then puts it also in the bass on A, and immediately after in the tenor on E. Since this is going so well, he adds another alto entry on G, another one in the bass on D, another one in the tenor on A, and yet another one in the alto on E. Let's listen. Again, we have a nice student work that needs a few touch-ups in order to become more beautiful. First of all, in counterpoint of 3 voices, if 2 are singing the same note, doesn't matter in which octave, the harmony feels rather empty. So by changing 2 notes in the alto, we've already improved something. Then Ziprianus looked at the soprano line and saw that it's very empty, and found out that he can fit on it the former subject of Ad Fontes Aquarum with a modified final note. The fact that it fits is nice, but it comes with a price. Now the statement of the new subject in the alto is totally overshadowed by it. If Ziprianus had wanted more clarity, he probably would have avoided it. Going forward, we can imagine that Ziprianus wanted to tick 2 things off his to-do list. 1, to make, for a change, a cadence on E, as is expected in this mode, and 2, to also give the soprano an entrance with the ita desiderat subject. And so, he alters the alto so it will lead to a cantizans on E, the tenor so it will lead to a tenorizans, and the bass to fit the new progression. He once again doesn't bother to notate the implied accidentals, preferring instead to leave it open so that future singers will fight about whether to add sharps to the tenor or a flat to the bass. Above this cadence, finally, he added an entrance in the soprano. Until now, the subjects appeared in different parts, and it didn't seem like the choice of voice or range had much meaning. Ziprianus at this point wants to change that. Before going to the next text portion, he wants to accentuate the desiderat, the desire, to make it feel stronger and stronger. How does he do it? For the first time, he'll set the desiderat in homophony, sung by 3 voices at the same time: bass, tenor, and alto. And after a quick fix to the soprano to fit it better to the lower voices, he puts the subject on a high E, the top of the range, and modified it slightly so he could fit in a cantizans on A in the alto, also at the top of its range. Underneath, he just needed to continue the tenor to a tenorizans and the bass to a bassizans. Let's hear it. This is probably the strongest cadence we've had so far. The only element that weakens it is the overlapping subject in the soprano. Further weakening takes place by immediately inserting the next phrase, anima mea. For this, he chooses a simple subject.
Anima mea.
Again, we cannot know exactly how he built this section, but this is one possibility. He put the subject first in the bass, then in the soprano, then again in the bass but on another note, then in the alto on E, and then again in the bass. Now the fun part, to make it prettier. First, he improves the soprano by making it sing parallel tenths instead of leaping to the note of the bass. Then he added a fake entrance in the alto. Fake in the sense that even though the melodic contour of the subject is not followed, the rhythm is the same, and thus the effect of a voice entering is clear. And then he simply added a free accompaniment in the tenor to fill up the texture. He even used the bass subject as a tenorizans at one point and added a cantizans above it. Now we can finally finish this sentence. Ita desiderat anima mea ad te, Deus. So my soul longs for thee, O God. For a change, Ziprianus won't introduce another subject and make imitations. For this exciting moment in the text, when referring to God, he'll make all the voices say the text more or less together, on a big and strong cadence, with no elements to weaken it. Let's see how he did it. He probably started with the tenor and continued it to a tenorizans. For the soprano, he first needed to have the words anima mea. He just put it in tenth above the bass, and then led it up for a cantizans. This created parallel octaves with the alto, but this can be easily fixed. Now he just needed to complete the bass line and end it with a bassizans. And to complete the alto line, and he was done. Let's hear it. Thanks for staying until here. We are not finished quite yet. Personally, I find it fascinating how beautiful counterpoint can emerge from this kind of meticulous technical work. Also, seeing how something is made, even noticing some defects in it, makes it more human and brings us closer to these old composers. Anyway, now we have to continue to the climax of the motet, the setting of Miserere Mei. Setting the Miserere Mei, Ziprianus might have thought of the famous Miserere of Josquin de Prez from the beginning of the century, one of the few pieces from this generation that we know left a mark on several compositions throughout the century. In it, the setting of the text Miserere Mei Deus alludes to techniques of psalm recitation. This piece, incidentally, is also in the third mode, just like our motet, and all the entrances you see on this page are either on E or B. Possibly inspired by this, Ziprianus decided to set his Miserere Mei in a similar manner, setting it, however, homophonically, in a manner reminiscent of the liturgical practice of falso bordone, a subject we discussed in a past episode. Again, I'm not sure how he thought about it when actually writing it, but it was possibly something like this. He first put it in the bass on E, and then repeated it a second time in the soprano on B. Then he simply harmonized it, added consonant notes in the other voices. Notice that in the first Miserere, the interval between the outer voices is a tenth, and in the second one, it starts with a fifth plus octave and then opens up to a tenth plus octave. This, combined with the semi-brief rest in all the voices, creates a very strong rhetorical effect. As you might remember from our episode about rhetorical figures, there is actually a dedicated figure to describe such a case. When voices are singing in homophony, it is called a noema. But when there are two noemas one after the other, like in our case here, it is called an analepsis. The rest in all the voices could also be considered a rhetorical device, one known as aposiopesis. While analyzing rhetorical structures in polyphony is a slightly later approach, Ziprianus surely understood the strength of the rhetorical effect he was creating. After this climactic moment, we are left with the last phrase of the text. Once again, Ziprianus takes refuge in his beloved stock canon melodies, using again one of the ones he already employed, a sequence of a descending fourth and an ascending third, but this time starting from the second interval. To this he fits the words et parce peccatis.
Et parce peccatis.
He'll just have to put the word meis at the end somehow. He puts an entrance in the alto, then in the bass, and then in the tenor. Look how the subject enters at regular time intervals. Perhaps he might want to add a soprano entrance as well. Knowing that it doesn't really fit at the moment, he nevertheless starts an entrance on A and freely continues until the end of the phrase, ending with a cantizans on E. He then goes back to fix the other voices and complete the phrase. He starts by fixing the bass, the tenor, and the alto. And then continues by completing the tenor line, accompanying the cadence with a tenorizans. Then he can complete the bass and the alto with a little fake entrance. Let's hear it. As we made it to the end of the text, theoretically, with a slightly stronger cadence, the piece could have ended at this point. However, Ziprianus wants to repeat the last sentence in a few more ways. Overlapping with the cadence, he lets the alto sing again et parce, but with another little subject.
Et parce.
He continues by putting it in the bass and then in the tenor. And as in the former section, when it's the soprano's turn to enter, it enters as expected, but continues freely. His idea is to make it so he could insert the first et parce section again, but then really end the piece at the cadence. Before he can copy the section and finish, he needs to quickly fill up the blanks below this freely composed soprano. He continues the tenor and includes in it a cantizans to A. He continues the bass that supports the cadence with a tenorizans, and finally fills in the alto line. Now all we have to do is to copy the first et parce section and see how we can make the cadence stronger. First of all, we'll complete the plagal basicans, sending it down to an A. Now, in pieces in the third mode, it is extremely common for the bass to come back to the E after the cadence. Here is a simple way to do it. I've also added the alto voice to support it. Ziprianus, however, does a slightly more extended version of it, making a little final canon between the alto and bass before finishing. In some sources, this is called a supplementum. Let's listen to the final cadence of this beautiful motet. We made it to the end. Now all that remains is to enjoy a performance of the piece. I actually went all the way to Leuven in Belgium to record the wonderful ensemble Cappella Pratensis singing it, in what I believe to be the first vocal recording of the piece. Cappella Pratensis specializes in the performance of 15th and 16th century liturgical polyphony, and in keeping with historical practice, they always sing from historical notation, in this case a large choir book around which they all gather. For this recording, we wanted to use a copy of the original source, but since the text underlay in the only surviving manuscript of our motet is really unclear, I remade it using our early music source's Serenissima font. Enjoy! This was our show about Ziprianus' motet and how it might have been made. We hope you enjoyed it. Many thanks to Iason Marmaras and Team Braithwaite for helping me write this episode. And of course, a huge thanks to Cappella Pratensis for helping us to hear this beautiful and forgotten motet. Don't forget to check the special page on our website for the full uninterrupted performance and all the footnotes and other extra information. If you enjoy early music sources, feel free to support us on Patreon. Comment, share and like. See you next time at earlymusicsources.com. Also you, Marc.